Hello. Not quite the graveyard shift, but we are getting there. So this is we should avoid easy geographic cliches, but in a way, the Mediterranean basin is the place where the North and South have always met and clashed and hybridized productively. So this is a good place for this conversation, and so is the space of this conference, where some of those same sorts of things happen. My name is Nic Dawes. A brief explanation of why I might be on this stage. I was a newspaper editor in South Africa and in India, and I now run The City, a nonprofit newsroom in New York City, which has a very collaborative approach and structure. So I think that's why I got picked out to be the interlocutor of these two. I think for context, we should start with understanding how the two organizations that Natalia and Daniel represent are really designed in response to the question of transnational collaboration, both within the Global South and between the Global South and the Global North. So maybe we can start with you, Natalia. Tell us a little bit about Agência Pública, how it was set up, and how it's responsive to that question.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for being here, listening to us. My name is Natalia Viana. I'm a Brazilian journalist. 13 years ago, I co-founded Agência Pública, which is the largest nonprofit newsroom in Brazil. We have 40 people. It's larger than The City. It's larger, I think, than Lighthouse Reports, and also older. And I say this because it's important, because it's a huge success. And even though it's a huge success, we have been seeing again and again and again that when we partner up or when we talk to northern organizations, we're being downplayed. This is basically what we're going to talk about today. But just so you know, the kinds of collaborations we do. Agência Pública is an agency, so our content gets republished in English and Spanish by over 700 media outlets, so we collaborate in that capacity. We also are part of transnational investigations. I'm a member of ICIJ. I'm a co-founder. I helped co-found CLIPI, which is the Center for Latin American Investigative Journalism. And we also lead transnational investigations more and more and more, which is also why I'm here, because I want to learn from these gentlemen, especially Daniel. But one of the things that I think is very important to keep in mind is that Brazil is a very big country. We are over 200 million people. And some of our stories are extremely relevant, extremely valuable, but they get overlooked just because we are from the Global South. So just one quick example. I have no idea if you know that Twitter is banned in Brazil right now. I hope you are, because if you're not, this is one of the biggest stories in tech right now. The Supreme Court has banned Twitter because Elon Musk decided to take a personal vendetta against Brazil. And this is a tech story, and I have no idea why it's not being covered so much more. I kind of know it's because we are from the South, but I think just opening everybody's eyes from, the stories from the South just make journalism much better.
It's amazing. Elon Musk has totally stopped talking about Brazil. He started talking about it for about 3 days, and then he completely stopped when the verdict went the other way.
Exactly. Anyway, but the thing is that not only Elon Musk, big tech is very big on Brazil, because it's a huge market. So if we're talking technology, we're talking about climate, we're talking about human rights, of course, Brazil is a huge place.
So from an organization with a 30-year track record in a huge, complex democracy and with deep links into its region, to a much younger outlet in Lighthouse Reports.
I don't often get to represent upstarts, so I'm happy to do so. There were 3 of us that started Lighthouse 5 years ago with a pretty simple idea in mind. We wanted to work in the kind of newsroom that hadn't previously existed. So we wanted, straight from the off, to try and create the newsroom we'd always wanted to work in, but could never quite find. And the simplest and possibly most strategic thing that we did from the outset was to decide that we would not create a platform. We were going to build an investigative team and we were going to try to build some hard skills and work from some of our experience, domain expertise, but we weren't going to be the platform ourselves. So we're going to force ourselves straight from the off to collaborate on every single piece of work that we did. So every investigation we've done over the last 5 years, which is roughly about 70, has been working with different outlets, different journalists, and many people adjacent to journalism all over the world. We've worked with 150 or so outlets. We did grow up with a team that were very much Europe-based to begin with, but over time, and thanks to the connections that came to light through our stories, we've taken on more diverse topics. The team itself is now spread from Tucson to Nairobi to Chiang Mai and Mumbai. And we are currently working in a whole number of places. We had an investigation that was out today that some of you who were at an early session might have heard about on a very unpleasant dark PR firm that's been helping to prevent regulation around dangerous pesticides that cause Parkinson's disease, and we were working with outlets in India, in Kenya, in the US, and Australia on that one. So Lighthouse now is 30 people. It's small in comparison to Agência Pública. And one of the joys of coming here is that we see a lot of people that we have worked with along the way, and people, journalists that we've intersected with, work that we've done. So it's very nice to be here.
So collaboration is very fashionable at the moment, and you can get collaboration funded, and you can get a place on a panel at a nice conference about it, which is cool. But I think what we want to talk about is why we should actually do it and what makes it work substantively beyond those very nice incentives. And Natalia, you wrote a piece in Nieman Lab in their 2022 predictions, and I would recommend everyone go and look at this piece. And it's really an urgent call for North-South collaboration, particularly around climate change and its impacts. And in that piece you say, I'm going to read, forgive me. When a journalist visits a community, they still need to convince an editor that these are credible sources. Community leaders are discredited based on the color of their skin. Editors dismiss them as biased, uneducated, and uncorroborated. And then you say something similar about journalists covering these issues. You say, unlike war reporters, those reporting from the front lines of environmental conflict are seen as activists, as partisans, as too engaged to really be trusted. So those are pretty strong words. When you think about that backdrop, how do you go about designing and participating in the kind of collaboration where you may well encounter those attitudes?
Thank you for the question. I have, when I was a young journalist, I met Daniel Howden, who was an editor at The Independent. And at The Independent, when I was working at The Independent on Sunday, I went through an experience that really shocked me and made me understand a little bit about the geopolitics of North-South journalism. There was an editor there who sat by me and never talked to me for months that I was working there on syndication. And then I was going to go back to Brazil, and then I asked him, would you be interested about stories from Brazil? And he said, well, you know the rule. 1 Frenchman is worth the same as 100 Peruvian. So if there is a huge disaster, you can contact me. This happened. And it shocked me, and it was shocking that he was so openly, bluntly telling me that my people were worth 100 times less than his people. And I mean, not all North-South collaborations are like that, but there is a little bit of that kind of prejudice and bias in most of the relationships we've built. So Agência Pública, one of our employees is a liaison with foreign media, and especially foreign media in English-speaking countries. And for several years, we've tried hiring Brazilians to do the job who are extremely qualified. But then at some point we said, let's hire a British woman, which we did. And immediately the doors were open to our reporting, just because she had the accent, just because she had the proficiency. And this also, again, shows that this conversation needs to be had. Not all partnerships are like this. There is a huge trend in partnering up, but now what we are seeing is like kind of the opposite. We're being approached a lot, and we're being approached a lot because it's trendy, because it's hot, and because there is money behind transnational collaborations. But quite often we see, we are an investigative journalism team, we cover human rights violations, and we're good at that. But quite often we see that people just approach us because, you know, they need a Latino on the table, they need a Latino on the picture. So I've kind of like started like doing a checklist for when we are approached for a partnership. And here are some of the things that I consider with my team if we should join or not. First one, is it a real partnership? Like, are partners collaborating? Are they actually exchanging information? Or is it just, you know, you're going to have the same reporting in different countries and it doesn't matter, we're just going to publish together and then apply for some award? Are they doing this for funding? Are we going to be heard? Are we actually going to be heard? Can we exchange our expertise? Are we going to be able to learn and teach from the other parties? Are we going to learn in the process, which is actually something that I learned from the Fundación Gabo in Colombia? We need to learn as a team, not only to discover things, but we need to learn. And finally, does it matter? Does it matter for my public? Does it matter for the audiences we have in Brazil? Or are we just doing this because there is a status there to do a collaboration? It is a bit tricky because when a reporter is approached with the opportunity to do a collaboration with Global North, you know, they get excited, even if it's not really relevant for what we're doing and even if it's not within our strategy thinking. But with this checklist, I think we've been able to learn to say no and not to jump on every opportunity and also like do journalism that matters.
So I want to get into some concrete examples in just a minute, but when you're going through that checklist, and you're in a way kind of flipping the power balance, right? And you're saying, well, we have something that you need, whether it's just a Latina at the table or whether it's actually your substantive expertise. How do you think about what the Global North outlet brings and what value they add for you?
There is a lot. There is a lot to be learned. So Daniel was just telling us back there about the level of fact-checking that the Americans have and that you have at Lighthouse. We can learn a lot from that. There is, of course, they have money. They have much more. They have much more money. They have much more people available, to help with illustrations, with technology. They have tools. They have, like, if you look at ICIJ, of which I'm a member, they have a ton of experience running a collaboration. But also, we also know a lot of things, and it is very important that we are heard and that, like, we can pass on the experience we have as well. Again, I have no idea why big tech reporters are not looking into what Brazil has been doing. Like, we've been dealing with misinformation and abuse from the big tech for 5 years, and we as a country have developed so much. And I just think, there's a blind spot there.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about what a good collaboration about big tech in Brazil, a market with, 345 million people, something like that?
200 million people.
200 million, a lot, that the tech platforms care about, what that would look like. But Daniel, when you and I first met in Johannesburg, I was a newspaper editor, you were a foreign correspondent, you were in absolutely not this mode. So talk a little bit about that and how you carried that experience into the kinds of collaborations you're now doing, whether it's on the US-Mexico border or in Sudan, Afghanistan, other really, really hard places.
Sure. I think I'll start with a mea culpa. I spent years as a foreign correspondent for The Independent, a British publication, and for The Economist, it's international, but also in many senses a very British publication. So I had one of those ridiculous jobs where I was the Africa correspondent, and I covered 54 countries, 55 during the period that, that I was there. And I would get assignments like, go to South Sudan and write us a State of the Nation piece by tomorrow evening. And your job was to make that look convincing. So the kinds of work and practice and thought processes that go into that, who you choose to talk to, who has power, and whose voice gets heard in conversations that could go into a piece that has like quite a profound impact on how an international community or policymakers potentially are looking at a country at that point, is clearly extraordinarily warped. I kept doing this for a while until I became what was known then as a fireman. That was someone that they picked up and just dropped in any given context. And there was this whole thing, it was like, you could write, but the thing was, you know, I could write better than the people who were less durable than I was, and I was more durable than the people who could write better than I did. So I'd do riots in Athens, I would do a tsunami in Japan, civil war in Ivory Coast, and the copy on occasions even looked convincing. I got a bit burned out with this way of working, and about 10 years ago, I quit. I spent some time outside of journalism, couldn't kick the habit at all. And when I came back in, I was determined to work differently. I can't say at that point I had an exact map in my head of how we would do this. But one clear thing was that working in a highly atomized way, reporting to faraway big centers, but working outside of a team was definitely one of the first steps. So, okay, you want to work in a team. What does that team look like? What is the function of working in a team? What would that collaboration look like? And once you start following those thoughts all the way through, you start to get to a really interesting kind of methodology and approach to journalism. You start to recognize what hard skills might be missing across newsrooms. If you're going to do collaborations and you're not going to be a platform, what do you bring? Like, what do you need to have? What are the scarce resources that are actually going to be useful so that when you pick up the phone and speak to scary people like Natalia about a collaboration, it's like, and she asks you, okay, but what are you going to do? You have an answer to that question. And then, I mean, I think we can get into this further down the line, but there are some things to say about, not all collaboration is in and of itself a great thing. And this is really a design question. I think we've talked a lot about who gets her share of voice, who is considered to be kind of legitimate, who is amplified, where ideas come from, power imbalances. But I think there are things to be said, and maybe we can get into some examples of actual investigations to do that.
I mean, it's very interesting in a way from a macro design perspective that both of your organizations are in different ways able to insert themselves in the production process and in the power structure in a way that kind of brokers some of these issues. And so we've talked a bit about values or mindsets and some principles for thinking about design. Let's talk a little bit about actual stories. Natalia, you've had some incredibly successful cross-border collaborations within Latin America. I mean, one of them in particular actually makes me want to go down the rabbit hole about Bolsonaro bots and Elon Musk and that collaboration. But tell us a little bit about the investigations that I'm alluding to and how those inform the principles that you shared earlier.
Thank you again for the question. I just wanted to comment on what you said, because I think it may be also Daniel's reason for founding Lighthouse Reports. The inserting ourselves in the production, it's by design. So we decided that because we could hear and approach the communities and treat them as like actual sources, valuable sources, we would do that, and we would offer stories that were so good that wouldn't be denied. And of course, you know, the media doesn't have any money, so they're taking the stories because they're good stories. So by design, that's what we said to do with Agência Pública. I have 3 examples. I'm going to be quick. The first one is ICIJ, and it was the implant files. Implant files for us was an amazing experience. Of course, Emilia Diaz, who is now the head of GN, she was the Latin America coordinator, and it was amazing to work with her because she was just brilliant and so respectful to all the partners. But it was also important for us because, it was not like a leak. It was a story about implants that were causing a lot of harm, and the industry was trying to quiet these harms down. But it was a lot of digging, and it was a story for us. We did the Assure story, which is an implant to prevent pregnancies. It was a story that was super in tune with what we do. We are a women-led organization. We cover a lot of women's issues, so it really fit what we do already. And we learned a story that we never knew. So we found out that in Brazil there are groups of victims of Assure who were trying to organize themselves. Never heard of that, and it came from abroad. So it was amazing. It was very good. So the partners actually did work together. ICIJ provided us a lot of support and technical, skills and help in every way we needed. And then ICIJ in that project did something which was nice but wasn't very nice, which is they convened all the partners in the US to have a gathering, in-person gathering. And we did not have money to send somebody to the US. So, that shows a little bit of the imbalance because then, the Northern and American and European countries could go, but we couldn't. And our reporter was kind of bummed by that. One of the reasons behind the foundation of CLIPI, Maria Teresa Ronderos, who is one of the most awarded journalists in Latin America, and Janina Segnini, who's also a brilliant Latin American journalist, they decided to found CLIPI because they felt that we are all members of ICIJ. But they felt that ICIJ was not really addressing the issues that were relevant to our region. So CLIPI is a center that only does transnational stories in Latin America. And just an example of how it matters, the first story that we published together was called Transnacionales de la Fe, so Transnationals of Faith, and it dealt with some groups. There were evangelical neo-Pentecostal groups. They were crawling into politics and had an international network and a strong connection to Trump and some strong Trump supporters. And this is a huge issue in Latin America that was absolutely not represented in, say, the CIJ investigations. Again, it was super timely, it was very relevant, we needed to do the story, and it was transnational. The partners in Latin America collaborate quite well, naturally, so, a Peruvian person is worth the same as a Brazilian person, so we can share very well and we respect each other, so that was brilliant. And the only problem we had there is, there is a little bit of a problem in setting the deadline, I think, with Latinos, and also being on time for meetings, but we did learn a lot, and we are learning a lot with CLIPI. And then after CLIPI, we at Publica decided that we are going to lead investigations as well. We're just beginning that, but I think we have the best teacher, who is Maria Teresa Ronderos.
So Daniel, when I look at some of your recent work, there are some different design choices. In some of the work on the US border, for example, the Smoke and Lies series, you worked with La Verdad in Ciudad Juarez, and you worked with El Paso Matters, a nonprofit newsroom in Texas that's quite similar to ours in New York. And then in the War Winners work in some of the most difficult conflict zones, you're working with local journalists and some really big London-based, Europe-based global outlets. Maybe tell us a little bit about what's similar and different about those projects and how the design of them and the process supports your strategic outcomes, and maybe some places where things worked less well.
Sure. I think maybe if we start at the border between the US and Mexico. Now, as Lighthouse, we'd already done complex investigations at other incredibly fraught borders, not least between Spain and Morocco, where there are gigantic imbalances just on the other side of a fence in terms of power and resources. But crossing the bridge from El Paso into Ciudad Juarez is one of the shortest walks that you can take between two completely different realities. And in launching into that work, that proved to be one of the toughest environments in which to build trust, which is essential to any meaningful collaboration. And even though we had met in person and we convened a kind of conversation between journalists from both sides of the border to share experiences and move slowly towards sourcing ideas that might authentically make for stories on both sides. I mean, one structural problem with many collaborations is that the final goal is a product. It's a specific product which works best for the largest partner or the most powerful partner in that collaboration. If that product is the final destination of the work, that's going to really profoundly influence how a collaboration works, and potentially in a negative way. What we're often trying to do with Lighthouse is to work out how do we build a base of evidence, how do we build an investigation that provides a base camp of findings that our partners can basically walk from there to a final product of their own and a story that is meaningful for their own audiences. So in this instance, we chose to kind of bring something that we were well placed to do, which was a visual reconstruction of the deaths of nearly 30 migrants in a migrant detention center in Ciudad Juarez, to report it from both sides. So to look at the US lines of responsibility and interaction, to look at what happened to the victims who went north of the border afterwards, but also to report it, of course, on the Juarez side. Now, that was a really complicated, fraught investigation. It took a long time to do, but right in the middle of that, a more conventional, older style journalism stepped right in there when a large US organization essentially came in and tried to hire out the Mexican journalists that we were working with. It wasn't like a power move by them to sabotage our investigation. They were just doing their thing. They were doing an adjacent investigation. Our model was to make an agreement with La Verdad Juarez, which would give them equal visibility and would serve them as a platform. But the other mode was, they're a journalist here, we want them to do some work, we're going to hire them, and they will work as fixers, researchers for us. I'm incredibly pleased that they chose not to take that offer and to stay the course with us. When the final story came out, it was a long read that was very carefully designed by La Verdad. It was a big product and a suite of stories for El Paso Matters. At the center of that were a number of visual reconstruction films of different lengths in different languages that were meant to provide a way into the story. That was the hard product from Lighthouse. Actually, the Mexico story was much more influential in many senses than the US story. It created a whole news cycle. Rocio, the editor of La Verdad, got a huge platform, primetime interview with Carmen Aristegui, and it was covered by all major media in Mexico. And subsequent to that, I'd like to think it's done some good things for La Verdad and their visibility. It's made it easier for them as a team to establish, to bring in additional financial support and resources. But there was a tussle there between the old way and a different way of doing journalism that came up mid-investigation. I'll just quickly explain War Winners, which is not an individual investigation, it's an area of our work, and it's where we work in post-conflict zones. So we try to restore international attention, energy, and journalistic resource to places which are in the phase where all of that is missing, but incredibly important critical stories are unfolding. So we first did that in Syria. And what we're doing there is partnering with individual journalists, or in this case, an outlet, a fledgling outlet, and staying the course with them for 18 months to 2 years. and seeing it essentially more as a media development, where we're trying to meet more holistically the needs of those teams. So with our War Winners projects, we have a national editor. So in this case, it's Mohammed Basiki from Siraj, a Syrian investigative reporting group, who at that stage were really trying to find their feet in exile and get underway. And an international editor who is from our team. And we were explicitly trying to learn and understand what it would take to give them a useful experience that would be a stepping stone to them being able to raise support sustainably and longer term. And what we got out of that was together we got a portfolio of international stories that also had national and regional significance. We had some really powerful investigations, some of the best stuff that we've worked on. And we got the outlines of what might potentially be a really useful approach to nurturing journalism in exile and journalism in absolutely the hardest places. Now, that same approach, we're working on that with Afghan war winners at the moment, which is somehow has been, in some ways, even more complicated and challenging. I know that people like to sit on panels and tell great stories of success. Sometimes it's actually quite a lot harder than it looks like when it lands on the website. But we are going to keep going with this because we think that there is a more holistic set of needs that come up when you're working with massive asymmetries in terms of the situations that two organizations are in.
By the way, Daniel, just so you know, I'm going to put your impact producer together with my impact expert. I've already organized with your team, and they're going to learn from each other.
You've got some frameworks coming your way.
So I want us to get to questions in just a minute, but I want to, before we do that, I want to acknowledge one thing, and that is that successful North-South collaborations are like a third order of difficulty. Collaboration for lots of newsrooms in the first place is hard, right? Then you take the next order of difficulty, collaborating across borders, cultures, languages, journalistic value systems. And then you take the next order of difficulty, and maybe this is a geometric progression, not an arithmetic one or an additive one, and make it between across these enormous differentials of resources, of influence, and of power. But there are some things about it that are just going to be per se hard, and that are going to be hard in any setting. So I think you've both built newsrooms that are designed to take that into account, and maybe just talk about, Natalia, a couple of things that are just hard, and how you tackle those, whether they're standards or comms or time zones.
Yeah, in collaboration. So Brazil is a huge country, right? And the economic wealth is based in São Paulo, where I'm from, and I am considered a white woman in Brazil. And we have really tried to make a newsroom that is pan-Brazilian, so that we really get people from other parts of Brazil, and also black people. Brazil is majority black. So we're trying to get much more black people, especially from poorer communities, in our newsrooms. And there is a lot of conflict. There's cultural conflict that happens. There is a lot of imbalance there. And, how to design these processes so that everybody gets a voice. They're very complicated. And then you get this in the Latin American scale as well. Brazilian readers are not interested in Latin American stories. We keep pushing them, but if you look at like the the audience, it drops when we talk about other Latin American countries. We just keep trying. What is the angle? What is the story? Because we know we are in Latin America. Brazilians have to pay attention outside of it. But I don't know. I think it's very important to keep the team focused on why we do what we do, and why we do what we do all the time. So every time there is a meeting, I start the meeting with the history of Publica. Publica was founded 13 years ago because of this. This is where we've been. This is where we're coming from, so that people understand that this is a journey. There's no it's a never-ending journey, but we are in a journey, and we've already learned a lot and grown a lot. That's how I try to do it.
Okay, let's see if there are any questions that I can discern through these blinding floodlights. And if you don't ask questions, I'm going to go down the Elon Musk rabbit hole. So I suggest somebody asks a question. Right up front here. There are microphones coming down.
Hi there, thank you. I just want to maybe continue understanding and having insights mostly about, for example, the funding side, no? Like, do you think that there is symbolic or, for example, soft agendas where you feel that some node organizations, especially in Latin America, comes to finance some projects or not, or how do you conciliate this symbolic side of like, I pay for the projects?
Yeah, we probably haven't talked enough about money.
I'm happy to go. Yeah, money is an issue. It's easy to forget that sitting in a very well upholstered conference like this. I'm going to talk about non-profit. I think one of the most important things is to think about where are the spaces where you get the opportunity to meet with or to interact with funders. Where is it that you can both connect and gain credibility that can help you to get funding? And the reality is that it's spaces like this, not exclusively that, but it's often spaces like this. Being seen in these spaces, being platformed in these spaces is one of the ways in which you get validity in the eyes of potential funders, or you get access, or you get to learn how it's done, or to talk to other people about how they've gone about solving these issues. I mean, at Lighthouse, we are trying to think about ways that when we budget for an investigation, we can put part of that budget to making sure that our partners who are coming from less represented communities, or are struggling to get fledgling ventures started, or are coming from different contexts, that those partners at the end of that process get to be at an award ceremony if such a thing might happen, or get to conference representation when we're talking about investigations. And that's just one of the ways in which we think about that. That's not a solution in and of itself, but it's one of those things. Partnership shouldn't stop just at the publication. It's also thinking about how you can take some of the visibility that you get as an organization and reflect some of that light on other partners and help them work out how to do some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because quite often, like, you get proposals that are like totally not aligned with what you do, and because there's funding behind it, so we are very careful. For many years, for instance, we said we don't want to do climate, not right now, and then when we felt that we were ready, then we went to do climate. For many years, we got proposals to do micro-grants for indigenous reporters, for instance. We were not ready. We just wouldn't do it. We're very good at saying no, as you can see. But also, I mean, there is a geopolitics in funding, and it's very important to observe it. I observe it a lot because I've covered the American influence in Latin America. That's my beat. And we have one hard rule, which is no American government funding. No American government funding. So you can see that, like, recently the American government's putting a lot of money into journalism. And I worked with WikiLeaks. I'm highly suspicious of that. And I think any organization really needs to look at where the money is coming from. Because there is a geopolitics, and there is like some interests that are much bigger at play.
I mean, one other way to think about that is that there are editors all across the global north who feel like, they don't have Daniel Howden to parachute in anymore because they've had so many cuts. And they are short of resources, and they want to do something. And it is also a way to flip their power balance, because the New York Times's and ProPublicas of the world are actually the exception now in terms of the resources they have access to. And I think that for some of us in smaller organizations or in Global South contexts, we now actually have some stuff that they might want. And maybe there are ways to, if you're good at saying no or strategic about saying yes, to flip to use that leverage too.
Given where we are, I think it's important to say that Greece as a media environment, sits pretty much in the Global South. It's very hard to see from this vantage point in this hall, but Greece is significantly lower down the Global Press Freedom Index than any other European country. Most journalists here either exist in outlets which are heavily compromised and controlled in terms of what they can put out, or they try to work as freelancers, and there's a heroic band of 2 or 3 investigative outlets who are trying to kind of get that off the ground. So very often when big stories happen in Greece, the best journalists in the country, and there are some amazing journalists in Greece, are fixers, kind of paid bystanders in the framing and the reporting on their own country. So it's just important to acknowledge that sitting in this hall today.
Totally. Anyone else? Up there, I see one. And before we close, is there anyone else that who wants to ask before we close? No. Okay, we'll take the last one then.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, the talk has been quite on strategy level, how a media outlet should or could operate and think about what a collaboration would be. I'm curious what you think about this. If I'm a Dutch journalist, young guy, if I were to become correspondent in, let's say, Latin America, let's say Africa one day, what can I do to avoid being the guy, Mr. Howe, then was in the past, and what can I do to maybe respect existing journalists better, and also maybe respect the fixers' quality, or maybe not work with fixers? And I'm curious about your advice and thoughts on that.
You should both have a go at that in our remaining 3 minutes.
I'll keep my answer pretty quick. There's a very long answer to that or a very short answer to that. The very short answer to that is it's okay to take on doing jobs like that. I'm not trying to say that all foreign correspondents should be banned. Some should. Put people on the byline. Make sure that the byline reflects the people who actually contributed reporting to the story, and make sure that you are taking into account their need for visibility where appropriate. It's not always possible. You might be working with someone who is a paid fellow reporter on a story who, for reasons to do with security and the fact that they remain behind after you as foreign correspondent leave, may not want to be there, but very often they do. Or if you're going to go with someone who knows a region much better than you do, and you're going to report a story, they may not be from that place, but you might be working with them and using their networks and their understanding to tell a story to an audience that you understand better back home, so you know how to bridge what you're reporting with a home audience. Make sure they're on the byline.
Yeah, I think it's important also to note, Daniel talked about extractive ethos, and it's, traditionally what Daniel was doing, like the British guy who went, all over the world to tell the story, it's a very colonial mindset. So I think you have to be aware of that. I think just, go have a coffee with the local people in the local newsrooms and actually listen, because again, one of the things that we didn't say, yesterday we were here in this panel about AI, and basically it was revealed there that the whole story that the Times did about over 1,000 illegal mining in Brazil was actually the idea of this one Venezuelan guy who was never quoted on the story. If you listen to the local reporters, you're going to get amazing angles. You're going to get amazing stories. And I think to close, I'm going to talk about the Mercenários Digitais, which is what Nic was talking about. Mercenários Digitais, which is like the digital mercenaries, is an investigative project that we did at CLIPI, the Center for Latin American Investigative Reporting. And basically, it's just a new angle. So with the problem of fake news is spreading in every country in the world, we started looking at who are the people who are actually selling the business of producing fake news. two candidates. And we started looking at this in Latin America, and we found that some of these consultants, political consultants, were working in a variety of countries. One of them is very close to the Argentinian president, but he was also very important in the attempted coup in Brazil, Fernando Serimedo. And we did this investigation, which was a real collaboration in Latin America, which was really cool. It's called Mercenarios Digitales, so digital mercenaries. You can look at it. But it could be a global story. We only did Latin America because that's what Clippy does. But, other countries should be doing the same, or we could do it all together. So the great ideas are there. Quote the ideas, but also listen to the ideas.
Thanks, everyone. We've spent a lot of time talking about values, about org design, about principles, not showing like beautiful illustrations on the screen, because it's in the values that you embody in the org design and the principles that you use to make these choices that the results come. So go and have a look at both the Agencia Pública website, at Lighthouse Reports. If you want to have a look at the city too, do that. Thanks for spending some time with us.